and welcome back. Today we want to take a second look at Jonathan Edwards' 8th sermon in his collection of sermons called Charity and Its Fruits. This sermon is on charity is contrary to a angry spirit. And so what Edwards is working on here is the recognition that God means for us to be very less about, we would say, anger and more about loving Him. And here, then in the second half of the sermon, we want to focus on a theme, which is the fact that we ought to prioritize our communion with God. So one of the things that Edwards said in the first half is that we, perhaps in our sinful nature, without God's help, are going to basically be more interested in our own interest than in God's interest. And Edwards says, well, we ought to have God's interest be first and foremost in our own minds. And in order for us to be more concerned about God's interest, we are going to have to be watchful about this and to pray about this. So that every time somebody does something, we don't first take personal offense about this, but we say, well, I know that I'm prone to take personal offense about this and not care about God's glory in this, but just my own offense. I'll have to be watchful that I don't respond to everything that happens in this world and take it all personally and fill my mind with angry thoughts and perhaps vengeful thoughts as people interact with me. I'm going to need to watch against that and then pray that God would help me to want to spend my days not, again, with angry thoughts about the way that person disrespected me or perhaps even disrespected my favorite political candidate or disrespected my favorite whatever. And rather that the Lord would work in our hearts and by His help. We need His strength for this. To care first about His interest, what He wants done in this world, and to be rightly angry at the sins against God, but honestly, to spend our days with a mind that is less characterized with anger and more characterized by love, loving God and loving others. So we're going to need God's help for this. We're going to have to watch out against our sinful inclinations and pray for God's help. The next thing that we want to think about is to consider your own sin. One thing that's going to help you when you are offended, people will offend you, they definitely will, is to remember a couple things. Remember that you offend, and you offend at least in two ways. You offend God. So you know, sure, you live in a world where people offend you. That happens. And yet you live in a world in which you regularly offend God, and yet God is kind and gracious in His response to you. And honestly, you regularly offend others. Right? Now, you may not offend people in the same ways that you are offended. You know, I would never do that. Well, okay, maybe you'd never do that, but you do this. And so there are ways in which others have to be mindful to not get angry about you. And so we just have to show the sort of respect towards others that we need them to show toward us. Because yes, they offend us, but we offend them. And so we can't have everyone just focusing on the offense against them and not realize the offense they create and the way that they're going to need kindness in response to their sin. And since you need kindness in response to your sin against others, you should show kindness in their offense against you. But one of the main areas that Edwards is heading in this direction is prioritizing your communion with God. See, if your mind is full of anger, if your mind is full of how dare they, if your mind is full of, you know, I think I'd really like bad things to happen to them, and maybe I would be one to help put them in their place. If your mind is full of that, then your mind is not in the place it needs to be to best worship the Lord. Your mind is just completely on other things. And remember, what the Lord wants you to do is to love others, but yes, love Him. And so if you prioritize your communion with God, then you say, I cannot have a mind that is so preoccupied with the offense against me that I can't read my Bible well. And I can't read my Bible well and meditate on God's Word. And as I meditate on God's Word and I reflect on His glories, I am led to a heart that wants to worship Him and sing His praises and honor Him, right? That's the kind of mind we want. That's the kind of spirit that we want. And we have to, in order to have that kind of a joyful worship of God, our mind cannot be filled with angry thoughts and vengeful thoughts, right? So you have to choose, right? How are you going to spend your day? enjoying communion with God by having a mind that loves God and whose disposition by God's help is set on loving God and loving others? Or are you going to spend your days just by being angry? Right? And it's up to you to decide what you're interested in. And then when you recognize, well, I'm more disposed toward the anger. Well, again, God help me. God put vengeful thoughts from me. Take them from me. Help me to set my heart on you, my mind on you, to long to live my days in loving you and loving others. Lord, I need your help, and yet I desperately want it because I'm just tired of using my days in this way, just being angry and ranting at people on Facebook. I don't want to be that sort of a person who's just on Twitter with just angry things to say to everybody. May what comes out of my mouth and what I type on my screen be the sorts of thing that communicates love, that I am enjoying a communion with God, and I am delighting to spend my days in loving others and blessing others. And again, we're going to need God's help for this, but if we, by God's help, move in this direction, we will find joy. Right? Because we are first enjoying a fellowship with God, and we are a blessing. We move out into the world as an agent of blessing others, and may God help us to be that sort of an agent of blessing others as we put away anger.